I'm Josh Miller, the Assistive Technology Coordinator for the Louisiana Accessible Educational Materials Program. Thanks for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn webinar, Autism Spectrum Disorder, Incorporating Assistive Technology. I'm pleased to announce today's presenter, Miss Katie Sample. Katie's an Assistive Technology Regional Specialist in the Southeast region of Louisiana. Her office is in Gonzales. She's a speech language pathologist, and her focus is on the pediatric population in both clinic and school settings. She's a certified autism specialist and a Baton Rouge native, where she attended LSU for both her bachelor's and master's degrees programs. And she's got years of experience working in the field of AAC, specifically when used with children with autism spectrum disorder. Katie, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
All right. Hi, guys. So glad that y'all could join me today. We are going to go ahead and jump in. So again, as Josh mentioned, I'm a member of the Louisiana Accessible Educational Materials team, and I'm located at the Gonzales Center at LeBlanc Special Services. So what we do a lot of this professional development, and then we also do a lot of assistive technology consultations and loans, and then we work with different teams like deaf awareness teams and orientation and mobility and printing large material and braille. But then we also do a ton of tech assist. So if you have any devices that you're like, well, I was supposed to program this, and that, or what would be one specific way I could even utilize my screen while I'm doing distance learning, we're here to help with any of that. We are here for you. All right, so today's objectives, we're going to talk about some neuro in association with ASD. We're going to look at how AAC can enhance language skills due to those neurological functions. We're going to look at different parts of language and its association with autism and other challenges that are associated with ASD. And then also look at the function of behavior, because we see that a lot with these friends in this population. And we're also going to look at a vast variety of assistive technology that's generally associated with this population, and also look at some the functional uses of visuals. And just to decrease any kind of distraction, I'm going to turn my camera. Oh, well, I'll leave it on. It's okay. All right, let's jump into what is autism. Okay, so here's the big, large definition of autism, but who is going to read and understand all that? So in summary, autism is a biogenetic neurological social language disorder, and it's also a heterogeneous disorder. So it's connected to a lot of related disorders as well. And it has a vast variety of symptoms. Now, its prevalence, and I put the link right here if y'all are ever just interested in looking at the prevalence across time. Right now is 1 in 54. This has tripled since 2000. It was 1 in 50 in year 2000. And boys are 4 times more common than girls. And this is also a co-occurring physical, it also has comorbid physical and mental conditions as well. And the CDC gives a short definition of developmental disability that can cause significant social and communication and behavioral challenges. So I wanted to jump into some comorbidities. So we see epilepsy, sleep disorders, ADHD, some gastro issues, feeding issues, obesity, anxiety, depression, bipolar. Now, 85% of kids that are diagnosed with ASD typically have some type of comorbid psychiatric diagnosis. So this is ADHD, anxiety, depression. Those are the most common. And so why am I even bringing up comorbidities? And this is because we need to look at the whole child. So we need to ask those questions, even if they don't have those, if the parents haven't sought out a specific secondary diagnosis to go along with that, looking for those features so that we see how we can help this child in any way, and bringing in other assistive technology that's associated maybe with some other features that we see going on with that friend. Okay, so to jump into some neuro. So as far as what's the specific neurology of the kids on the spectrum, well, we would have to get some really well done MRIs. So that would be putting some people with major anxiety and sensory issues into a white tube and asking them lots and lots of questions while having them awake so we can study their brain. This is difficult for any of us if we didn't have any neurological issues. Most people are pretty anxious when they're having an MRI, so it's difficult to have that data. Although more and more research is going into that, they've been doing MRIs since 1971. Just don't have any hard substantial data. However, just to look at the brain and what each side of it does, our right brain is responsible for the left side of our body, so it crisscrosses, and this is our artistic and creative side. And then our left side is also crisscrossed. So this is responsible for our academic and logical side of the brain. This is also where language lives. Sometimes with these friends, language can be really, really abstract. And most of the time we have to have some type of conversion to create things that are more concrete. And when we think about language, we're thinking about both oral and written languages. It's all living in this area of the brain. This is just a nice little visual of what our logical and creative sides of the brain do. And you can kind of start to think of um, what kind of activities would stimulate those certain sides of the brain. So I wanted to start a little quiz. I want to go into if you think it's the right or left brain. So in the chat, I'm going to ask y'all some questions and let's see. All right, you ready? Here's the first one. Drawing a picture of an imaginary castle. Do you think that this is your right or left side of the brain? Seeing some answers come in. All right, give yourself a pat on the back if you said right. This is the right side of the brain. Let's go to number 2. Doing your math homework. Do you think that this is your left or right side of the brain? Math homework. Yep, this is your left side of your brain. Nice job. All right, we're going to switch to number 3. Daydreaming when you should be studying. Is this your left or right side of the brain? Nice job, everybody. Yeah, this is your right side of the brain. You get to use your imagination. That's that creative side, the right side of the brain for sure. Okay, number 4, talking to a friend. Do you think that's your left or right side of your brain? It's a tricky one. So officially the answer is left. I really like the people that said both though, because it meant that they were functionally using skills on both sides. What if they were having a creative conversation? But those main skills, yeah, left. That language big component is in your left side of your brain. Nice job. All right, number 5, listening to a parent or a teacher, left or right side. That is our left side of the brain. Nice job, because also our receptive language skills are on the left side. But I'm really liking the people that are saying both, because if you're functionally using your neurology, then you have a functional brain balance and you're using everything. But yeah, this the main component in the left. Great. Okay. Now let's look. Oops. So it raises the question, what are you? Are you right or left brain dominant? Do you like things really, really linear? Do you like numbers? Do you like to just be look at things analytically? Do you like to kind of have things more randomized, creative? See see an end result with clarity, process things holistically. To do that, and Josh is going to put the link in the chat right here. There's a fun little brain test, and this is 30 seconds. What I find fun about this brain test is if you're right or left, you can kind of find different ways of, oh, I thought this way, and I kind of saw these other friends that kind of think the same way like me, and I can kind of connect with them. Oh, they think a little bit different than me, but had these structured activities. Let me kind of bend what I typically do, because I have some people that think differently than me. Um, I like this test a lot. It's 30 seconds. So just to show you, this is what my results were. I was more left brain than right brain dominant. I like numbers and things like that a lot. But what I wanted to point out is that it says you use your brain equally. I would be very shocked if any of your results came back as 80% one side and 20% the other, 90%, 10%, or even 70%, 30%. The what this is showing is brain balance. It's showing that we're equally using both hemispheres. Well, this is because I'm a neurotypical adult. So one of the things that we can attribute to that is that corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is the bridgeway that talks, that's the communication between the left and right hemisphere. So this is responsible for those neurotransmitters talking between both sides. It's sometimes referred to as brain balance. So how can we strengthen this for those friends that don't have that actively used corpus callosum, that we're not using that part of the brain so much? Well, we can strengthen it by crossing midline. This is when you make best friends with your occupational therapist on your team and work on incorporating it throughout the day. I went to this one training that talked about walking a figure eight. And so what they did is they, similar to this figure eight that's at the bottom of the screen, they put duct tape on the ground. And before the day started and in between transitions, they just had the child, each student walk the number eight as they were going between those transitions and starting the day. And so it just offered a really great opportunity for crossing midline. This link that I put right here is a super duper link that just has a couple of fun activities of what you can do when crossing midline. But I really would suggest reaching out to your occupational therapist for how to incorporate that throughout your day. Whether you have an entire classroom with kids on the spectrum or one and they're in an inclusion setting or half or what have you, this would not hurt any child to have cross midline activities embedded throughout their day. Okay, so what's all this have to do with autism? So I wanted to jump to the brain that focuses specifically on language. So we have Broca's area. This is our speech production, expressive language. And then we have Wernicke's area, our speech comprehension. Again, that's on our left side of the brain. I wanted to jump into those specifically. So receptive, we're understanding information, but in really remembering that this is both verbal and written. And then expression, any form of communication that can convey messages to others. This does not mean that it just needs to be verbalizations. So what challenge these gestures, focusing specifically on gestures when working with these friends. Difficulty processing and utilizing words, difficulty processing those words that are used in directions. And as we know, those directions can be multi-stepped. And then also reading and writing can be significantly difficult. So with these friends, sometimes some people are like, well, they can read, they can read. Well, one of the red flags that we see with these friends on the spectrum is something called hyperlexia. This means they hyper focus on letters themselves and they look like, oh, they know the alphabet and they were 18 months old, or they love letters and numbers, and they're saying words and reading. Did they comprehend any of that? Do they know how to toggle those letters and then that word can? How can I use that word can and functionally in several different ways? So just wanted to point that one out. And also significant difficulties with conversations and utilizing that in social aspects. A lot of times we see these friends lose words pretty early. Most of the time, that's when they hit about 2. Sometimes these friends can sound robotic and sing-songy, so they could be difficult to understand. And sometimes we don't see any verbalizations at all. and a good bit of times we see significant challenging behaviors because if they don't have that communication, well, then their body will talk for them. And also that we didn't even have that baseline of gestures to communicate. Two other big things that we see is echolalia and perseveration. So there's two different types of echolalia. One is immediate echolalia. This is that parrot speech. So they repeat phrases that they just heard. So if the adult says, "Hi, Sam," and the student says, "Hi, Sam," that was not their phrase. They just imitated that right back rather than saying, "Hi, Miss Susie." And then we also have delayed echolalia. So this is maybe when we're hearing that Peppa Pig reel going over and over again, but it doesn't always have to be a TV show or something from a video game. It could also be a phrase that they heard from a person. So if a grown-up told the child every time in the morning when they saw a chair, "Sit down, Sam," well, then the student might just associate the chair with "Sit down, Sam." This is important to point out when you're looking at the language level and when you're talking with the whole team. Also, when you're talking with the whole team and trying to specifically sell them on utilizing AAC in different formats. And if the team says, "Well, they talk, I've heard him talk. I've heard him talk and say a bunch of stuff." Was it them though? Was it their words that they said? Or were they using some kind of form of echolalia? Now, there are definitely ways that we can mitigate echolalia and kind of move around those phrases. But it is important to identify what is and what is not their language that they produce themselves and didn't imitate from another. Something else we see a lot is perseveration. So this is when we have repeated behaviors or thinking the same thing over and over and over again. And it can be a topic, an object, an action. And they often say the same thing or behave the same way. And it's typically not socially appropriate or functional. It's like being stuck in a loop or on a record reel. So how can we pull away from this perseveration? Visuals are definitely a humongous help. Utilizing a first then board would be fantastic right here. Showing an all done sticker on top of that first object and then moving to the next object. But I would utilize really, really short verbalizations. The adult does not need to keep talking about the action or the object that this child is thinking about because it's just bringing it back up. So I would talk about it one or two times with these short verbalizations. Boom, you moved on. And also practice is fantastic. You can bombard the environment with something you know they perseverate with. Let's say that a child shows self-injurious behavior every time an iPad is pulled away from them, but you need to implement AAC, and this is going to be in a tablet form. Well, we need to bombard the situation in practice of moving away from that desired object and moving on to the second task. And this is just going to take a lot of patience from the grown-ups and utilizing those visuals and practice, 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 so this child can learn this new and appropriate behavior for that transition. So this also includes social language, and we need to think of social language in both receptive and expressive aspects. So reading social cues is significantly difficult for this population because this is not something that's written out on the wall. We have clear, concise rules, so clear, concise classroom rules that are typically posted on the walls, but there's no social rules posted on the walls for these friends. And really that's where we need to start is black and white things of making things clear cut for this population. Difficulty understanding facial expressions, understanding appropriate jokes and puns, understanding them at all, and then later utilizing those appropriately expressively. Again, gestures and feelings. A lot of times we see feelings goals with this population, but they need to know more than just sad, happy, and mad. We have so many other emotions that we can feel. So building onto those more complex emotions is something, especially we need to focus on when they get to that middle school, teenage year, adolescent, teenage years with those more complex emotions. And then expressively wanting to interact with others, communicate with others, using social appropriate language with others. I had a friend that was in 8th grade and he was very high functioning, and he was to the point where he wanted to go talk to his peers. He really, really did. And he walked up to the group and he said something about a girl that he thought everybody would laugh about. and it was not funny. They found it offensive, and he just came back and he's like, I don't know what I did wrong. Well, we had to practice. We had to practice some socially appropriate things to use in that situation. Um, so again, it's just those difficulties even relating to others, and finding topics that they might be interested in. The entire class is most likely not interested on train engines and very complex train engines, but we might be working with some friends that is the only thing that they think about. I've met a senior in high school that could tell you stats about every Baton Rouge high school from football team from the current year that we saw him all the way to 1980. You asked him about college football? No, he wasn't interested, or professional football, but he could tell you high school stats. And he would go to talk to other friends, and they didn't want to talk about that. They wanted to talk about Saints and LSU. So it's blending into other interests of others. And then again, those difficulties, maybe even sharing, responding to others when they talk to them, taking turns in a conversation. These are all things that can be practiced within within their special education team. All right, so what's some behaviors? So behaviors that we might see are repetitive body movements, or just hand movements. So sometimes, so this is stimming. Stimming isn't a bad thing, and these kids need the opportunity to stim throughout the day, but we do need to work on making it a part of their day in appropriate situations. So let's say that they just needed to jump, 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 and wiggle, 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 wiggle. Well, we can schedule that with their visual schedule and let them have a stimming part of the day, just so they can kind of get it out. You definitely don't want to tell them, oh, you can never stim ever. I mean, it'll be like a rocket ship ready to explode and just be kind of building up. But I don't want everybody to look at it as stimming is just bad. We just need to schedule it appropriately. Sometimes we might see these friends cry or laugh or get angry for reasons unknown. This is most likely because they're perseverating on something just within themselves, and they're not expressing it. They're just kind of thinking about something that got them upset or happy. Transitions are significantly difficult. That it's this ambiguous period of what's going on. That there wasn't I didn't see a specific step that said that I was going from 1 to 2. There's this little space in between. Who knows what's going to happen? So those transitions are significantly difficult. And then we have sensory issues that might be pleasant to some people, and that Japanese cherry blossom candle smelled absolutely terrible to some of these friends. So they might get upset over those specific different sensory inputs. We see a lot of food selectivity with these friends. A lot of them just like hard, and one psychologist said they like brown, crunchy things. So like chicken nuggets are a lot, and very bland, plain things, plain noodles, all that kind of stuff. So you often want to recommend for some type of feeding therapy with these friends. And then again, focused on a few topics. But what is behavior itself? So behavior specifically has to be something that someone says or does, and it has to involve movement, and it must make an impact on the environment, and also influenced by environmental events. This needs to be able to be observed, described, and recorded. How can you test this? Well, you can do something called the dead man test or the teddy bear test. So if a dead man or a teddy bear can do it, then it's not behavior. So if you say a child will not swear at peers, well, a dead man and a teddy bear can also not swear at peers. So how would you make that into something that's behavior? So you could say child will use appropriate language towards peers, child will use kind words towards peers. So you want to say something active that the child will be doing. So it's important to know the difference between behavior and labeling. So here's some examples of behavior versus labeling. So let's say that person A describes the child. They were just acting up. They were acting up. Well, table A, table B, and table C will all have several different descriptions of what acting up will be. But if you said they were head banging, They're head banging on the floor when they get upset. Well, that is very specific. There's no interpretation for table A, B, or C to go with that specific behavior. This is really important when we're looking at our token economy systems. When we're giving those tokens, that achievement for that child, it needs to be for a specific behavior. What kind of behavior are you trying to morph? What kind of new behavior are you trying to gain? You're not going to get that with working with ambiguous labels. You have to really be sure that you're giving those very specific behaviors. Functions of behavior are typically those for attention seeking, trying to escape, trying to get some sensory access to tangibles. But you better believe that every single behavior is communicative. Please look at me. Please go away. Get this out from me. I need to chew on something. I wanted to have that. It's not functional communication, but they are communicating something. 80% of kids who have these big behaviors also have language impairments. So again, typically linked to those things that we talked about, also psychological factors. They might have some lack of self-confidence, seeking revenge, different things like that. But did they have functional language at the end of the day? Were they able to say to the other person something appropriate versus letting their body do it for them? Behavior problems are common in kids with those communication disorders, as we just said. And so it's typically this continuum. We have these communication disorders, and so then we see problem behaviors, and we have emotional problems, and we typically have a learning disorder. You could start anywhere on this continuum, and they're typically all linked. Some other issues that these friends have include hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity. So hypersensitivity, they're just over responsive to any of these things: sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, balance, body awareness. And the same can be said for hyposensitivity. I had one friend on my caseload that was significantly hyposensitive, that she went, we were playing outside and she went in an ant pile, and none of us knew that. And I mean, she was smiling, smiling away, playing. And then we looked and she was in an ant pile. Nobody would, she was significantly hypersensitive. So just for everybody to be aware that it can be on both sides. These friends also face a good bit of motor issues. So this can range with fine motor, so working with things with drawing, cutting, buttoning, writing. And there's different tools to help with any of those things, but they can also be hypertone or hypotone. So hypertone, this is for kids that are really, really tight, and it's difficult. They have difficulty even stretching across the table, difficulty bending. Sometimes their legs might be really, really straight and they're not even bending their knees at all. Their feet are flexed at all points. Sometimes you even have to work with some equipment with the PT because they're so hypertone, and they have to work on stretching those things out. And then we also see a good bit of hypotonia. So this is some low muscle tone. These kids are really floppy and they appear to be weak. So a good bit of the time, communication is the first thing that's spotted. Before we got an autism diagnosis, before we got OT, the first, they're not talking. All right, let's send them to speech therapy. And when that speech therapist sees a kid W sit, so this is their bottom is on the ground and their knees are on the ground and their feet are both out, both sides. I couldn't try. I've tried to do it. I can't do it. When you see a kid W sit, they need a referral immediately to OT, and then start talking about some psych referrals as well. Most of the time, that's a telltale sign. Their cores are just really, really weak. But remember, as we're talking about these difficulties with friends, if you have met one person with autism, you have only met one person with autism. This is why it's called a spectrum. It's not a one-size-fits-all disorder. And now they're diagnosed on levels of severity since we've switched into the DSM-5. So within the spectrum, it ranges from executive function, sensory processing. They have repetitive behaviors, motor skills. They perseverate, social awareness, verbal and nonverbal, difficulty with information processing. They could have one of a couple of these, all of these, difficulty significantly in 3 areas and not so significant in other areas. The range is truly not repetitive from one person to the other. Um, and then within those difficulties, like I just said, the severity ranges. So see all the way to that purple where it says high functioning autism, the bottom is referring to the old diagnosis. Now we have this large umbrella term of autism spectrum disorder. And like I said before, you're given a severity level now, and where you might have gotten Asperger's syndrome diagnosis, now you would just have a higher functioning autism diagnosis. All right, so what's some assistive technology that we can use to help with these friends and the difficulties that they face? So this is our bread and butter for AT when we're talking with our teams, when we're talking with our administrators of why we can and want to utilize assistive technology. So this is any service that directly assists with an individual with a disability in the selection, acquisition, or use of assistive technology. And so I now put the reference there just so that you can go back and refer to it as you need to get stuff for your kids. So what can AT address? So all those areas of difficulty we talked about, their sensory, communication, behavior, safety learning, executive functioning, social skills, fine motor skills, motor. All right, so some sensory and motor stuff. Well, first of all, we have to know what we're addressing. So with sensory input, we look at two big areas. We look at proprioceptive input, and we also look at vestibular input. So proprioceptive input, this is some deep body input. Some low-tech ways of getting this is by giving big bear hugs, or putting some heavy items inside of a chair and they have to push the chair from one side to the other. Some things that you can hear sometimes from friends that are seeking proprioceptive input is some really fun teeth grinding. It sounds terrible, but we hear a lot of our friends on the spectrum, they'll grind those back of those teeth because they're seeking that proprioceptive input. It's when we would reach out to that OT, ask for some chew tubes, ask for some appropriate ways that they can get that input. I've worked with some OTs that had even itty bitties. They said, let's give them some gum. That's appropriate to you. I mean, but follow your OT and follow the plan that they recommend. Also, we think about vestibular input. So this is big body movement. Low-tech ways of getting this is turning in the hall. When you turn in the hall, you can turn a couple ways to one side, but you want to make sure that you turn a couple ways to the other side just so that they have balance. And then also having jumping breaks throughout the day. We see a good bit of our friends jumping and moving all around, well, they're seeking vestibular input. So it's definitely important to incorporate that vestibular input throughout the day. A lot of times when looking at reaching of how to get this input throughout the day, we talk about sensory diets. And we have a really great Lunch and Learn coming up on March 24th at 11:30. And Josh Miller is going to be presenting that. And it has nothing to do with food. And it's a treatment that helps those with sensory processing disorders. And it provides sensory inputs for the child's needs. And it just gives a lot of activities and strategies on how to keep that child focused and organized throughout their day. All right, so what's some fun stuff that we can use to address sensory? All right, so this is for that proprioceptive. This is sensory bins. There are so many different kinds of sensory bins out there. Think of rice and beans. So this is making bins with just lots of stuff in it, but you can make the stuff thematic. Those look like Orbeez that are over to the right. This stuff even feels good. I love feeling a sensory bin. It's very calming. Other things you can make are busy bags. So this is a bag containing in the specific activity, and its directions are designed to incorporate certain body senses. Some other fun low-tech things that you can make for sensory bags. You can make sensory bottles. It's getting a water bottle and putting in some water and a bunch of glitter and maybe even some balls or stuff, and they can move them up and down. Again, for that proprioceptive input that I was talking about earlier with getting some chew sticks. This is the official chew sticks from the company, and the different sizes and colors they can come in. And with any kind of chewy that you're looking for it to be non-toxic, durable, latex-free, and have texture on it. But there are so many different shapes and colors, and sometimes even flavors available. Here's some other kind of chews. That's a T tube over to the left, in the middle a P tube. And sometimes they even have various objects. The most common one that I've seen is a Lego. So to keep these things from being slobbery, fun things to chase all over the classroom, you can put them on a lanyard, or you can put them on one of those little stretchy things that you put on a belt loop and just pull it up on a coil, pull up that coil, and they can chew, 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 and then zoom, and it's back on a belt loop uh, on the side of them. All right, so other sensory things that we can get for that proprioceptive input are weighted items. So weighted things are pretty calming. When using anything weighted, this is not something that should be on them all day. In fact, this is not something that should be on them majority of the day. I highly, highly recommend, when using anything weighted, please consult with an OT when you're utilizing these items. One of the biggest things that I would recommend of never even touching unless an OT suggests it are those you're going to see toe walkers, and you're going to be like, oh, I've seen these weighted ankles, weighted ankle things that I can put around them. Please do not touch those unless an OT recommended that and prescribed that. Also for weighted vests as well. Um, there's lots of weighted blankets, and some of them are have bean bags inside them, and some of them even have some fidgets that are on top. Again, this is not something that you would want to use all day. There's also a ton of really cool fidgets. These are just a couple of examples of different fidgets. That fidget that's to the top right over here, this one's so cool. It wiggles and jiggles all over the place, and it's got several different inputs all over. But then there's really cheap fidgets that are to the left over here, and ones that you can put on top of a pencil. So these help with gaining attention and focus, sensory processing. Really cheap ways that you could do fidgets. You can get the rough part of Velcro. You can put that under the inside of their desk, glue that to the, or just put the sticky side to the top of their desk, and they can just feel on something on the desk. You put that on the side of their chairs. You definitely would want to functionally build this in it. So let's say that you're, if you give them anything, they just throw it across the room. Well, you would then incorporate this as something fun, and you would keep it timed, and then slowly build that in more and more and more into their day. Sometimes people use things called fidget contracts. So it has clear expectations that are within that. With utilizing those fidgets. So let's say you're going to a fifth grader and he's like, I'll show you. Oh, well, we're going to refer back to our contract. And I have a link that I can give y'all as well to those. It'll be inside. I'll link it inside this presentation. Other great sensory things are body socks. So this is also great for that deep, deep body input. These are so soothing. They help with heavy work. And it helps kids develop spatial and body awareness. This is most of the time a big, big goal that we're working on with those friends, and also increasing muscle strength because it gives you resistance as you're inside of it, and motor planning. So to get vestibular input, these are some typical things that you might see. The good old sit and spin, mini trampolines. Mini trampolines are so great because you can fit them inside of a room. And then various different swings. That air walker swing, I was in a clinic that had that air walker swing, and in between, let's say a couple of tough groups, I would go sit in that swing. It is so calming and relaxing, but because it feels like a big body sock, and you get to swing at the same time. There's platform swings at that bottom square. OTs can change that out to several different inputs. It could be carpety, it can be spiky, it can be flat. There are several different kinds. And log swings, there are lots of more swings out there, including any of these AT tools. There's lots of tools out there. These are just some general go-tos. Any of these items, I would highly suggest considering a sensory room at your site. More and more schools are starting to do sensory rooms right next to the self-contained classroom, so that they can just easily transition quickly from one to the other. And most of the time they have all these objects in there. Just something to consider. And we definitely want to give them more ways for vestibular input, big body movement throughout their day. And here's some simple ways that we could do it. So we can step into the next subject. So this is just putting a stool right behind the student's chair. And on one side of the stool is ELA, and we are traveling into math. And you step over the stool, and now you're in math. So that's easy peasy way to incorporate that math. You could spin into math. And don't forget about that handy dandy, really wonderful because it's free tool of Go Noodle. Go Noodle is so fantastic. This incorporates a ton of movement. And it's really short activities, and you can even have it in specific categories that focus on different subjects. I can't even say enough about how wonderful Go Noodle is. And if y'all can start dropping in the chat, if you incorporate motor throughout your day for these friends to seek more vestibular input, please put that in the chat. We all learn from each other. So next up, talking about seating and positioning. So this is building on adaptive seating. Sitting in a plain old chair is really hard for these friends. They have, like we said before, typically have really weak cores. Well, if you have a weak core, then you're not going to be sitting up in your chair and looking in front of you. If you're not sitting up and looking in front of you, how are you going to retain anything that was presented to you? So adaptive seating is something that we definitely need to look at. At the top, we have some wobble chairs. Now, in the middle, this adjustable wobble chair, wanted to point this out because typically when we think of wobble chairs, it looks like this really young pediatric thing. But what about our friends that are in middle school and high school? That needs to look age appropriate for them. Well, there are age appropriate wobble chairs, and this is an example of one of them. There's also floor seats. You can get a cheap old stool and put that down. I've worked with a good bit of OTs that recommend the kids just sitting on stools. And you can also use medicine balls, and there's ball chairs as well. Now, this is so exciting. So a good bit, like we said before, those comorbidities are ADHD. Well, a good bit of things that we hear with ADHD kids is busy chairs. So ways that you can make busy chairs is just putting a bouncy band at the bottom. Use those front two legs, and it's just a resistance band that they get to push on. But check out this fun little item that I found at Therapy Shop that you can put at the bottom of these chairs. It's bouncing. It's called Wiggle Wobble Chair Bouncer. And you put it at the bottom of the chair like you would a tennis ball, and it lets their whole chair bounce up and down. Other different seating things that we can look at are peanut balls, those moving sits, the disc or the wedge cushion, and also donut balls. Various different writing tools we can use for fine motor. Include several different pencil grips. There's also different weighted pens and pencils that we can utilize. And there's several different adapted scissors. There's some scissors that you can just push down because they haven't worked, that they're nowhere near tripod grasp, they're nowhere near putting those fingers together, and we're still just a palm. Okay, so we can push down those scissors, be able to put several fingers inside that grip. Scissors that you can access with just a switch. But then with positioning, I wanted to point out specifically this vertical board that's on the right over here. So this is to help those friends also with those weak chords. Typically with friends on the spectrum, we want things to be on a vertical. This makes it significantly easier for them to increase their attention and perform with detail-oriented tasks. Vertical, vertical, vertical. Please also think vertical when we're talking about AAC. You want this to be presented at a vertical. So jumping into behavior, when we're addressing behavior, we want to be proactive. We want these things to be in place, and we want to get ahead of that behavior before the behavior gets ahead of us. And so ways we can do that is being very consistent when utilizing tools such as token economy boards and visual timers. But we also want really meaningful reinforcers when we're using this. And when we're utilizing reinforcers, we want to make sure that we establish success. See this little go-to 5 token economy board? You do not always have to start with a 5 token economy board. You can start with something that's 3. I've had some friends that have been on an every 30-second, they were just at a reinforcer because their behavior was so significant. I've had some friends that they were on a token economy board that were up to 100 with their specific behavior was following a direction within the first time of the adult saying it. Okay, so they got to mark it at the end of the day, and once they reach 100, that's when they got the reinforcer. And for that friend, their reinforcer was getting an A, and that's what they wanted, was getting an A in conduct. This can be so different and so variable across the board for any of the friends that we see. The thing is that you have to establish success with that. So if you have to start with just 2, okay, they understand. They understand if they did AB, if they did, or I'm sorry, let's say AA, because that has to be the same behavior that you're focusing on. Boom, they got this reinforcer. Within your reinforcers, you definitely want to have a gambit to choose from. So every kid might not love a goldfish and might not love an Oreo and might not love bubbles. You need to talk with that entire team, have an entire inventory. I mean, you want definitely more than 30. You want a lot to choose from with these friends. It could be tickles. It could be getting to clap the other grown-ups' hands. It could be anything that and then I would choose 2 from those and let that friend uh definitely be able to get a choice and what they're working for. With social skills, tools such as social stories and video modeling comes into play big time. Now, when we're utilizing social stories and video modeling, if you can get peers to be within this role play, that would be fantastic. Also, if the individual that you're focusing on with these social skills can be in that video and their picture can be in that social story, please, please, please do that. When you're making a video modeling or with social stories, you want to make sure that your language is very clear, concise. You don't want to use very elongated sentences. You want to get to the point. You also want to use proactive language. So you're basically avoiding negatives. You're saying actively what their body is doing. So in that social story about running safety, it should not have any words like no running. We're not running today. Because guess what the child's going to do? They're going to run. So just to be conscious about that. How we can embed calmness to overall increase their executive functioning is looking at the environment, addressing that sensory system. So natural light is also often suggested, and light covers are also suggested. So the typical light covers, so those blue light covers that go over these very, very harsh fluorescent lights that can be really abrasive to our kids with sensory needs, but there's also these really cool light covers that you can find on Amazon that where you get to pick your own cloud. Would you like a breathtaking stratus or would you like a stratocumulus? There's all kinds you can choose from. If any of y'all were familiar with octolights, I think that they're just now that they don't ship out directly from their website. I think they just outsource through Amazon. There's a good bit of resources and a good bit of the top researchers that look at increasing overall executive functioning talk about green time a lot. So that means increasing more time where they're outside and get to be with naturally green things, or it's by putting just fake plants, fake green plants inside. We definitely want to have those sensory areas. This link right here brings you to a pretty cool live binder that our Josh I mean, it's got the whole caboodle of what you would want, sensory things. Here's a lot of ideas of what you could do with sensory bags. Here's a ton of stuff that you could do with sensory bins. It's got guides for sensory resources. It's got Project Sensory, autism classrooms. I mean, this live binder is pretty, pretty cool. And you'll have access to this link as well for a lot of different sensory ideas of how to create your sensory area. Also making your cool down area, and this is a link to just a Google Doc of which you could just readily print out for a cool down. I saw this vocabulary once of utilizing the word chiller. Choose your chiller. This is you cut a I've heard an OT refer to this 2 days ago as the pool noodle is just the go-to things for OTs to be able to adapt for anything for any of these friends that need AT. So cutting off a pool noodle, just getting a squish squish on that. Do you want some colors? Do you want something that you could shake with beans? Chillers could be anything, but you wanted to introduce that vocabulary. Having one of those cheapy little egg timers ready to join the class. Just an example of what you can use. Have is being proactive, not reactive to behaviors, getting ahead of it and getting set up in your room. And we definitely want to be mindful of our voice production and visual and language, the visuals that are in the room and the language production. Also, when looking at fantastic tool, this was called Me Moves. Now it's called Calm Connects, and this is the link that brings you there. This is helps reduce off-task behavior. This increases ease within transitions. This is all neurologically researched and based. It was created by OTs, and they worked a ton with a lot of professionals to make sure this was evidence-based practice, and it increases overall calmness. You follow these shapes and it's got this really calming music. You don't do it more than 15 minutes at the time, and I promise you your transitions will be significantly better. Maybe even doing this 3 days a week. You don't have to do it 5, but just doing it not more than 15 minutes, allowing that calmness. It is so fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it. This is just an example of what it looks like. You can see the students move around. Oops. Also within executive functioning, we think about thinking maps. This is a great link right here that can bring you to a ton of thinking maps. Thinking maps look really similar and pretty much are the are what we think of with graphic organizers. And these are just some more examples of graphic organizers and how we can make them for our itty bitty, for our, maybe this would be about second or third graders right here, and building up in different ways. This link right here brings you to interactive graphic organizers, to where you can type directly into the document. So if you're going into this freeform web version of a graphic organizer, you can type right there, say whatever you wanted to say. So you got that cool handy dandy link for interactive organizers. But graphic organizers don't always have to be with words. What about our pre-linguistic friends? So you can also make graphic organizers in a visual way. This is an example with 3 Little Pigs. And let's say that you're focusing on sequencing or story retell or identifying main characters. Great way to do it. Just be able to manipulate and stretch out with visuals in the form of a
Just give us one moment. I think we may have lost Katie for just a second, everyone.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
I don't know what happened. My computer crashed. Sorry, guys. That everybody can. Did it crash everything?
Well, the meeting continued.
Okay, great. All right, so y'all can see me now. Sorry about that. It's raining. Like I said, it's raining in Baton Rouge. Sorry about that. I bet everybody can see me now. The glitches of 2020 and 2021. Huh?
You're doing good.
Awesome. All right. So visuals, these can look from calendars, schedules, step-by-step instructions, choice boards, classroom rules, and special communications. These are just some examples of what visual supports could look like, and some videos that you can show staff of how it's utilized, from directions to first then boards, utilizing it throughout the day. We definitely want to make sure we're using those visual schedules. It helps with sequential memory, organizing time, and decreases anxiety, and Also decreases occurrence of challenging behaviors. This really helps us within transitions, like we talked about. This just those ambiguous open spaces without not knowing what's coming next. But also we get achievement. I just finished that one and now I'm going to go to the next one. I certainly feel great when I get to check off one thing on my to-do list. And these are just some examples of what those visual schedules can look like. So in communication, these things range from gestures to utilizing words to AAC symbols. And it ranges from, within AAC, this ranges from low tech to high tech. Low tech is anything without a battery, so paper-based. Mid tech, it has a battery, but this is a static display with 1 to 28 locations, with or without levels. And then we have our high tech dynamic displays, speech generating devices. When looking at low tech, there are things like pod, low-tech eye gaze boards, tactile language system, and also core boards. Those core boards can be ranged on lanyard sizes, which I highly recommend. Single pictures, just regular printed out 8x10 core boards, posters, I also highly recommend, and removable core boards. Those poster core boards, I recommend that in the classroom. In the speech therapy room, in the PE room, I suggest it everywhere. I had a principal that let me put it at the front of the entrance at the school once, and that was fantastic. So we got a lot of aided language stimulation from the other peers. And mid-tech can range from those Big Macs all the way to scanning devices. And then we come to our big wigs, the high techs. So this is just a range from looking into MAGs, motor planning apps, to grammar scale, with various different apps. Of course, there's those eye gaze dedicated devices, and these are typically on Androids, iOS, and even Windows devices. But when we're looking specifically with ASD, most of the time, these are the guys we're looking at. We're looking at different motor planning apps. So that's things like LAMP, Speech for Yourself, Cough Drop. But we also see some Prolico. And we want to make sure that these devices are dedicated. This is not an iPad. This is not a tablet. This is your talker. And those guys play really well with iOS. They don't play so hot on Android. Pretty much Cough Drop's the only one that goes on the Android well. Different things, that accessories associated with AAC are various different styluses. If we're not isolating the finger all the way, holding something to help get us within that grid, and key guards to be able to focus on one thing versus the other on that grid. Now jumping into cases. Cases are really, really important when getting these AAC devices for these friends. You want to make sure the cases are amplified, because we don't just talk inside of a classroom. I'm able to talk outside in the cafeteria at PE. I talk everywhere. So should they. We want to make sure that they're hands-free. They have a strap. Nobody carries around my voice for me, so they should carry around their voices themselves. It is important to set a goal for that child independently carrying their own communication device. These things need to be durable. Most of these friends are used to those things being YouTube machines. Why isn't this YouTube working? This is supposed to give me YouTube. Throw it across the room, throw it at somebody, throw it at the chair. They need to be durable. And also, again, making them on a vertical. It's easier for them to process things and access things on a vertical. So we want to make sure we have a pretty strong supportive kickstand. What's my favorite of favorite? This guy is, we're now on the iAdapter 6. They're very, very durable. Why they're on 6 is they had parents with complex communication needs and behaviors saying, hey, you're giving this to my kid with autism. They have behaviors and this isn't strong enough. So that's why they're on 6. If you can ever snag this tune box on Amazon, load up. So this guy is about $300 or $400. And it comes with a strap. Whereas this guy, the tune box it's under 40, something like that, but they run out a lot. You don't want the minis. You're going to want for the regular size iPad. And it's got is a Bluetooth speaker up there. When utilizing any of these devices, it's important to remember to charge the case as well as charging the iPad, so that you have you don't run out on their voice. But you can also always get dedicated devices through several different companies that lock it in. Most of the time that's for insurance purposes. When utilizing those devices, we definitely want to make sure that we're using that core vocabulary. We're utilizing these words that are comprise 80% of our vocabulary, and utilizing different tools such as Core Word of the Week when embedding that in their day. Guys, we talked about a lot of tools today, and there are so many other tools that can help out these friends. Again, because they often have comorbidities. Ways that you can learn more about those tools are more lunch and learns that we have coming up. We have our dyslexia lunch and learn taught by Justin Sims. That's on February 2nd. And we have our, that's my timer. We have our dysgraphia lunch and learn that's on March 12th, also by Justin Sims. And then that one that I spoke about earlier with sensory diets with Josh Miller, that's in March 24th. Thank y'all so much for joining me today. Please make sure to follow us on social media, keep up with our current events. And this is our website down there where you can find us to ask for any service requests. We are here for you. You can contact me here, my email. Please contact me via cell. We're all working from home right now. But